everybody. My name's Sam, and my camp name is Freddie, and I work on the outdoor program team with the Girl Scouts in Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana. I'm excited to join you today to talk about how to set up camp with a backyard setting, or even inside, as long as you don't use the stakes for the tents. So this session is called Setting Up Camp, Backyard Tent Pitching, and we're gonna go over how to pop up a tent, and also some care tips of a tent and how to make it your own. In order to be best prepared to setting up our campsite in our backyard, we want to make sure we have all of our supplies. So you want a tarp, one that you want to check so that it doesn't have holes because it will keep you dry and your tent dry. You want your tent, and in this case I took our tent apart so that we could see all the pieces and make sure that they were all in working order. So we have the tent and our rain fly. Both of these you want to check for holes, make sure that they have all the pieces that they need to and that all the zippers work appropriately. We have the poles of our tent. A lot of tents that are simple tents that hold 3 or 4 people typically have 2 sets of poles, and they're held together by these strings, so they're easy to piece together. Your tent may have more. We of course have our tent bag, and then we have our stakes. So stakes help keep our tent in the ground. If you're setting this up in your backyard, make sure you check with your parents that you can put stakes in the ground. And if you're setting up your tent inside, then make sure you don't use the stakes this time. When you do have stakes outside, you don't want to lose them, so make sure that you put them on something bright like your tent bag, or that you stick them standing up in a very safe spot so that no one trips on them. In order to put the stakes in the ground, you do want some kind of rubber mallet, or even a rock or a log works well. We use these objects to put the weight on the stake and get it into the ground so that we don't bend the stakes. And last but not least, you do want a water bottle to stay hydrated while you're setting up your campsite. Now, we have all of our supplies here, but the biggest supply that you need is the actual location of where you set up your tent. So you want to pick a designated campsite that has all the things that are good for a campsite. In order to pick your perfect campsite after you have all the supplies you need to set up your tent, you want to make sure you're checking for a flat area, that you have plenty of space to set up your tent, and that you also clear it of sticks, pine cones, or other debris that could be uncomfortable to sleep on. If you're in a native area, make sure that you set these things aside so that when you leave, you can put them back where they belong. The other things that we want to be aware of are our 5 W's. They're little reminders on how to stay safe when we set up our campsite. These include wildlife. We want to make sure that we give wildlife their distance, so making sure we're not setting up our camp on any of their homes or their trails. We also need to be aware of wigglies. So these are things like insect homes or hives or anything like that that wiggles around that we want to give space to so they don't come into our tent or our area. Our third W is weather. We want to be aware of how the weather impacts the area where we're at, and if we can do anything to stay safe from the weather, especially when it comes to wind. So we want to make sure we're staking in our tent and that it's safe to do so, and we're prepared by knowing what the weather is going to be. Our fourth W is Widowmaker. This stands for any dead trees or branches that could be in our area. We want to make sure that we're in an area that is free from that and that we give trees their space so that we're not worried about anything falling on our tents. And our fifth W to be aware of is water. So when we're camping out and setting up a campsite, we want to make sure that we're not camping in a low-lying spot where it can flood, and we're not too close to water because that's where wildlife and lots of insects live or come to drink. And we also want to make sure that we're close enough to water, either if it's our house or somewhere out on trail where we can get water so that we can stay safe and hydrated when we're on trail. Once you find the area where you want to set up your tent, just double check that it's clear of any sticks, debris, or pine cones or anything that might be in the way. When you set up a tent, it's always great to have a buddy with you. So if you have a friend or a family member that can help you, definitely invite them to join. Today I have my partner, Tom, with me, so he'll be helping set up the tent. The first thing you want to do is work together to lay out the tarp. By laying out the tarp first, it gives you a nice base to put your tent on, and it's a nice protective layer to prevent water from getting into your tent. The next piece is, of course, the tent itself. A good tip is to pay attention to how your tent is packaged. You want to make sure that when you put your tent away, it's even better than you found it. So make sure that it's completely dry, completely cleaned out, and that it's rolled up right to fit in the tent bag with all of its pieces. So for our tent here, we're going to take it out of its bag. We're going to make sure we pay attention to where we put the bag so we don't lose it. I'm going to put it under my water bottle for now. And we're going to roll it out. We have our poles in here. I'm going to set to the side near my water bottle. And also the stakes. Make sure you have all your stakes, and we don't want to lose those, so put them somewhere visible too. Our rain flies on top, but that goes on at the end, so we're going to set that to the side. Then we have the tent itself. When you set out your tent, make sure that it's nice and straight and flat, and then decide where you want the door to be. So we're going to have the door face you. Great, now we're ready for the poles. For all tents, they're a little bit different, so make sure you know how your tent is built and the instructions that go with it. For this tent here, there are 2 poles, and they are connected by these strings, so they piece together really easily to build the whole pole. You and your partner can each put a set together. And for our tent, we have these little white pieces where the pole will go through. You're going to put the pole through on each side so that they cross like an X. On some tents, they may be clips, so you might just lay them across the tent and then clip them on, and others may have more pole pieces. Now what Tom is doing is he's threading his completed pole through one side of our tent. As you notice, whenever we work on a tent, we want to protect it because it keeps us protected. So make sure that if you do have to stand or be on the tent, that you're either on your knees or you're going to take off your shoes to protect your tent. He's threading it through the first half of the white little lacing, and then I'll continue to thread it through this other half, and we'll do the same with the other pole. Make sure that as you're threading your poles, that you make sure that the pieces stay together at the end. So we have a complete pole on each side. Then you also want to make sure there's about the same length of pole on each end of the tent, so that when you pop it up, it's nice and equal. In the middle of your tent, there's often some kind of tie or loop where the poles go through or get tied together so that they're more secure. So make sure you fasten that too. Now we're going to work together as a team, and we're going to work on one pole at a time. So we're going to both hold an end and push it up as it gets into position, and then we're going to grab the other side. Ready?
Got my side.
My side's in. Switch to the other one. As you can see, the tent may come up a little bit, and that's okay. If you have 4 people, it's a little easier because you're each on one end. But you just address the tent as you need to. And if it helps, you can hold onto the corner of the tent as you're trying to connect it to the pole's end. And on each tent, it's a little different, but our tent here, the pole, has a spot right in the end of the tent where it just pops in there. My side's in?
That's good.
Great. So now that we have our tent standing, we want to stake it down. And in order to stake it down, you can see our tarp's a little bit longer than our tent. So to make sure that it's waterproof, what we're gonna do is we're gonna tuck in our tarp. You're gonna fold it up and in. So we're gonna just fold the end in a little because it's creating a waterproof barrier for our tent. And that way we can still stake it down. If you left it out, then water could get in and get your tent wet just from underneath. So we're gonna do that on all sides. Nice job. Now that we're here, we are going to stake our tent in. When you stake in your tent, make sure that you know where your stake goes to attach your tent to the ground. For any stakes that you put in, you do want to put them at an angle towards your tent, usually about a 45-degree angle. So that's right in between 90 degrees. And that's because if it gets windy or things move around, your tent will stay in place. To put your stakes in the ground, we're going to use a rock or log or a mallet if you have it. Instead of stepping on the stakes, we want to use those objects because stepping on the stakes causes the stakes to sometimes bend or break, which won't help us in the future. When we stake in our tent, we're going to start with opposite corners, just like we did when we put the poles in. So both Tom and I are going to take a stake and we're going to start at opposite corners, making sure that we pull tight to keep our tent flat and laid out, and then we're going to do the other side. Okay, so I'm pulling on mine a little bit. I'm going to put it in at an angle, using my rock, watching my hand. Okay, my side's in. So he's pulling it tight on that side.
All right, all done.
Okay. As you can see, as we set up the tent, Tom and I do have to communicate and talk to each other so that we know what we're doing and we're on the same page. Now, when you're setting up your tent, if you don't have a place to hold your tent bag, or if you're at this point, it's a great idea to stick your tent bag inside your tent so that it doesn't blow away and you don't lose it. And then zip your tent back up so that we keep all the bugs out. Another piece that's really important on tent is the rain fly. This keeps the rain out. If it's a really nice night or you have a mesh tent and you know it's not going to rain, sometimes it is nice to do some stargazing while you sleep or before going to bed. But for this situation, we are going to put our rain fly on. Now before we do it, we just want to point out that on the rain fly, and again, they're all a little different, but all rain flies typically have some kind of zipper. And you want it to line up with the door so that you can get in and out of the tent and the rain fly at the same time. A lot of rain flies also will have some ties on them or Velcro strips, and that's to attach them to the poles so that it stays nice and secure even when it's windy. And then you also want to make sure that the rain fly is facing the right way so that the inside, where the zipper seals are showing and the ties are showing, is on the bottom hugging your tent. We're going to move it over together, taking care to try to line up the center with the center of our tent. And as we do it, we can flip up the side and we can do a couple of those ties to keep it secure. You want to tie these probably in a nice, easy bunny ear tie, or like what you do to tie your shoes so that it comes off easier when you're done with your tent. We won't do them all right now, but you should definitely do it when you set up your tent. When you are securing your rain fly, make sure that you secure it to the base of your tent. Some rain flies secure to the stake, some secure to the tent itself, and others even have buckles where you just click them together. So however you can secure your rain tie with your tent, do so now. Nice job. Now, as you can see, our rain fly is pretty secure, but it is a little loose. And if we're expecting rain, we're going to be out for a while. There's lots of ways to keep your rain fly tight. So a lot of them might have strings tied to them so that you can stake them out far from the tent. And others, like this one, also have some low staking spots where you can just take a stake and pitch out your rain fly away from your tent so that it keeps the rain rolling off instead of soaking into your tent. So we'll stake those in now too. Great. So now we have our tent all nice and done. A couple little pointers is you can also stake out the front of your tent This area, especially if it's a bigger front area or a larger tent, it's called the vestibule. It's where even when you open up your tent, you can maybe keep your shoes or your bag right in this little area before you get in the tent to keep them dry from dew or from rain. And then when you are using your tent, if you have your rain fly that you're not using, you always want to roll it up inside itself so that if it does rain or bugs come or anything else, it doesn't collect in your rain fly. Instead, it falls right off. So you roll these up and then you tie them with the ties that might be there or the clips that the tent might have. Same thing with your door. If you need to, you can just roll it up so it's out of your way and you can just enjoy with the screen of the tent. Now that you did all the hard work of building your tent, we're going to fill it with all the things that you need for the night. So you can open up your tent. And again, for the door and the screen, you can always roll these if you need to so that they're out of the way and you're not going to step on them. There's also ties where you can tie them up if you want to. And we can roll the other side of our rain fly. Now, when you sleep outside, you can just put your sleeping bag or your bedroll right down on this and sleep for the night. If you want a little more comfort or you're there for a couple nights, then it might be good to get a sleeping pad. So this is something that not only has a little cushion, but also insulates you from the coldness that comes from sleeping on the ground. So this one's a simple foam pad. It's rolled up real nice, so when you roll it out, it might be still a little rolled, but you can lay it right in your tent. And as you can see, I didn't go in with my shoes because just like the outside of the tent, we want to protect our tent. So I would take off my shoes if I wanted to go inside, or I could just kneel in if that's how I can reach everywhere I need to. The other type of sleeping pad you can use is more of an inflatable one. And so these ones come in slightly smaller packages and you can pull them out and inflate them as needed to lay them out just like this one. Now, sleeping bags are great to have outside because they're nice and closed and keep you nice and cozy. So we have one of our sleeping bags here. This is actually a mummy style sleeping bag, meaning it has a nice head to keep even your head warm. Other sleeping bags are square or larger than this, or even there's some double sleeping bags out there. Either way, anything that you'd be comfortable in, you want to lay out in your tent. And then if you're camping from home, your backyard, or even inside, then you can also have the luxury of sleeping with a nice comfy pillow. But if you don't have a sleeping bag, that's okay too. You can use sheets or a blanket or make your own bedroll that's like a sleeping bag. So what we did here was we have a sheet and a comforter. And we already wrapped it up because what we did with the sheet was we left a little hanging out of the comforter and then we folded it up so that when we slip into our blankets, our feet are still covered and protected with the sheet. Now, as you can see, this tent might comfortably sleep 2 or even 3 people. Every tent's a little different, so make sure you know how many people your tent can sleep. Other things that you can put in your tent are all sorts of fun things. A lot of people like lights so they can see, or other comfort items, which I'll show you in a little bit. A couple more tips just as we're using our tent. Just like I mentioned before, you definitely want to keep your flap and door closed as much as possible to keep out any bugs. When you are inside your tent, it's best to keep things from touching the sides of the tent. This way your stuff stays dry, because if it touches the sides of any of the tent, the dew or the rain will push against it and it could get wet. Another pointer is that if you want to eat, you always eat outside of your tent, because eating in your tent can attract unwanted guests or wildlife that we don't want sleeping with us. Once you get your tent inside set up with all your tips and tricks, make sure you make it your own. So put any items that make you comfortable, get your family around a good snack. You can get stuffed animals, your backpacking supplies, anything that you need to make the night great. We're so excited to see what you can come up with. Thanks so much for joining us this time, and we can't wait to see you next time.